Hi, my name's Simon Prickett. I'm the Developer Advocacy Manager here at Redis, and welcome to today's workshop, which is Redis Stack with Python, Flask, and Redis OM. So here's what we're going to cover today. We'll start off with a brief introduction to Redis Stack. We'll then look at what the Redis OM for Python client is, before moving on to spend the majority of our time with a sample application. With this application, we'll look at how to model document data, so JSON type documents, and persist that to Redis Stack using the Redis OM client. We'll then look at, once we have data in there, how to get it out again, and how we can perform some quite rich and varied queries, again using the Redis OM client. Finally, we'll close with a brief review of where to get help and support should you need it. So, what's Redis Stack? From a developer's point of view, Redis Stack is a bundling of the Redis open source database that you're already very familiar with. It comes with features such as key expiry, pub/sub, streams, hashes, all the data types that you're used to. Plus Redis Insight, which is a visualization and management tool for Redis. That's over there on the left. And some additional capabilities. So those capabilities are search, the ability to perform rich SQL-like searches and full text indexing over documents in Redis. JSON, adding JSON database data types to Redis as a native data type. Time series adds time series as a native data type and allows you to aggregate time series and perform all sorts of interesting things with time series data. The graph capability adds Cypher, so you can have a GraphQL type database within Redis. And then finally, Bloom's one of my favorites. It brings some additional probabilistic data structures to Redis, including the Bloom filter, and you'll see me on YouTube with other content that talks about that. It's well worth a look. So Redis OM for Python is a Redis client or SDK. So whenever you're doing coding with Redis or any other database, you need some sort of SDK or driver or client to manage the connection between your programming language and the database and its protocol. That's what Redis OM does. It's a bit different from other Redis clients that you may have used because it's much higher level. A lot of Redis clients map individual functions onto Redis commands, and to get something done, you might use, say, hset, store something in a hash, and then hgetall to get it back again. Redis OM takes a slightly different approach. It's more like an ORM, an object relational mapper, but for Redis. So here you declare the data models that you want to use, and in Python they're classes. You can give fields in those different types and validate them, and we use the Pydantic library for that. And then you can persist them to Redis in a very simple manner without really worrying about what the underlying lower level Redis commands are. Should you then want to get that data back out of Redis, you can do that with a fluent query interface that uses Redis Stack's search capability. And if you need to do something that is much lower level than this, like you would with a Redis client that you've used before, Redis Pi, for example, then you can get access to an object inside Redis OM that gives you all of those underlying functions. So Redis OM can be the only Redis client that you need for Python. It's open source, MIT licensed, and you get it by doing pip install Redis OM or adding Redis OM in Poetry. So the majority of our time today, we're going to be spending with a sample application. That application is a Flask application, and it's incomplete in that it has no front end. So what we've done is we've built a template or a starter application to show you how to get going with Redis Stack, Redis OM, and Flask. All of this equally applies if you're using something like Fast API. Redis OM for Python is actually built for compatibility with that too. We're going to look at some basic CRUD operations on a data model, and we're going to store the data in a Redis Stack instance as JSON documents, and we'll see how we can atomically retrieve and mess around with bits of those documents. The application itself is also open source, and you can get it from GitHub there, where you'll find a README with a full set of instructions if you want to follow along with this workshop. So here's the data model that we're going to use in today's application. Basically, we're modeling a person here. The application or the data set that I'm going to use involves tracking musicians who have distinct skills. So it might be musical instruments that they play, and that's represented as a list or an array down the bottom there of skills. Might be guitars, drums, synthesizer. And then we've got some information about the person, so their first and last names, ages, appropriate data types, so the age is an integer and names are strings. And then we've got a personal statement, which is a sort of free-form text statement. I'm going to use that to demonstrate some of the full text search capabilities of Redis Stack. Inside the data model, we've got another object for the address. So we've grouped all of the address fields together, and we've made some of them optional. So the unit field, for example, is optional. You don't have to specify it. And if it's not specified, it won't get persisted. And the country field, I'm going to demonstrate how we can use Redis OM's modeling to give that a default value. So if one is not provided, then I'm going to default that to the United Kingdom. Because we're going to use an example where we're sort of building a find me some bandmates type application for musicians who are based in the UK. So what we're going to do over the course of the workshop here is first look at how to create a model in Python with Redis OM, and that'll be a class that we create. Then we look at how to persist values in that model or instances of that model to Redis Stack and use the Redis Insight tool to see what actually happens when we do that, what gets written to the data store. We'll then look at different ways of retrieving data from Redis Stack using Redis OM. So we'll start with a very simple get by ID, and we'll work up to more complicated queries that you wouldn't normally expect a key value data store to be able to do. Finally, we'll look at what if you need to access some lower level features. So call one of those functions that maps to a Redis command while still using Redis OM. Okay, so we've done a lot of conceptual stuff here. Let's dive in and actually play around with the application and Redis Stack and Redis Insight and see how all of this stuff works. So I'm going to go ahead here and switch to the browser. Here I've got the repo for the skeleton app that we're going to use. You'll be able to clone this yourself and use it in your own applications, or you can follow along with this workshop right now. So what I'm going to do is grab the URL for that and get my terminal here and then quickly git clone that. So we've got a copy of it. Now I'm going to go into there, Redis OM, and see what we've got. We've got a Flask application. We've got some requirements that we need to install. And we've got a Docker Compose file if you wanted to run this with Redis Stack through Docker. I've already started Redis Stack locally, so we won't need to worry about that. And what I'm going to do now is make a Python virtual environment and install the requirements into that. So we'll use Python 3 -m VM, create a virtual environment, and activate it. And then do pip install all of the requirements. Basically, our requirements are Flask and Redis OM. So there we go, we've done that. And we can start VS Code, and we've got the project up and running here. So here we've got the project. We'll take a look at what is going on with the files here, but I just need to do some housekeeping first and actually start the project and run its data loader so that we get some sample data in the database. So in order to start it, I'm going to need another tab here. So let's go into here and let's get into our virtual environment there. And I'm going to need to do Flask run to start the application, and off it goes. It's off and running on localhost 5000, and what we then need to do is do python data loader.py, and what that's going to do is load some sample data into Redis Stack for us. So we've loaded a few people. This isn't really too meaningful at the moment, but I'm going to keep a copy of these because I'm going to need these IDs later. So let's create a new file over here in VS Code and just keep those there for now. Right, so let's take a look at what we've got here. So what we've actually done here is we've created some people in what was a previously blank Redis Stack database. And we need to take a look at how we actually did that. So the start point for this is how we've modeled the data. So if we have a look at the data that we loaded, we've got a people file here. It's the same structure as the person that I had on the slide. So it's basically mostly a flat object. The address is itself an object. We've said that the unit field is optional, so not everyone's going to have that. And we have said that personal statement is going to be free text field and skills is going to be an array of strings and so on. And you can see here that I'm using musicians as an example. So this person here is a guitarist, a pianist, and they play the trombone. So they're multi-talented. So what we're going to be able to do is potentially match them up with other people that have similar skills and interests using the search capabilities of Redis Stack. So how do we go from this to some sort of model in Redis OM to data in a data store? So over here, we've got a file called person.py, and this is, I'll just close this, give it some more room. This is the model that we're using in Redis OM here. So Redis OM allows us to define data models in classes, and it provides some helper classes for that we can extend. So I'm going to start down here with our person class. So what we're saying here is that we want a class called person, and it extends something that Redis OM provides called JSON model. That basically says that this is going to persist to Redis as a JSON document using Redis Stack's JSON capability. And then what we do inside here is we define all of the fields that we want in our class that become all of the things that are persisted into the JSON document. And I can basically say I can give them a type. So I say here that the first name is a string, and that's a field that we care about. And then I've said index equals true. And that tells Redis OM that it needs to add this to a search index that it will build and maintain for us. And Redis Stack's search capability will keep up to date as we change and add and delete data. And it says that we're going to be able to search on this field. So we want to index it. So I've done that for the first name and also the last name, which is also a string. We can have fields of different types, and they will become their correct JSON types when persisted to Redis. So here we said age is an integer. If you remember, I said we were using Pydantic for validation. So I can use positive int here, and I can say, oh, it's got to be an integer that's at least 1, or not a negative number, because people don't have ages that are negative numbers. I'll gloss over address for the moment, but skills then becomes a list of strings, and we also want to index that. And then the personal statement, which is a string, we said we wanted to index that as well, but we said we also wanted to do full text search on it. So here we do both index and full text search, and that tells Redis OM that it needs to index it in a way that we can do sort of fuzzy matching on it. So rather than exact string matching as we're doing for things like this list of skills here, we'll be able to do stemmed matches and some other things. And we'll look at how to do that later. So I kind of passed over address here. So address is the thing in the model that isn't just a scalar type, if you like. It's not a flat string, and it's not a list of something. It's itself its own object. So what we've done here is created a secondary model for that called address, and we said the address is of type address, and address itself is another Redis OM model. It's an embedded JSON model, so it's one that's designed to go inside a document. That means when we persist this, it won't get its own key in Redis, but it'll be stored in the JSON for the person. So all of this stuff will live together as one document. And we just define this in the same way as we do everything else. So here I've got a street number, again, positive integer, street number is generally not negative. The unit, so whether they live in an apartment, it might be like unit 12 or something. Not everybody does, so we've made that an optional field. Again, Redis OM supports that. And we said we're not going to index that one because it's optional. Data might not be there for everything. All of this is stuff you've seen before, so we're going to have these fields are all strings. And then what's slightly different here is with the country. I said earlier that our application is sort of focused on the United Kingdom. So if people don't provide a country when they sign up, we're going to assume that they're in the United Kingdom. So we're basically saying index this field, use whatever values provided. And then if one is not provided, then just assume United Kingdom. So now we've seen how the model works. We need to put it into practice within the context of our application, actually provide some values, create some instances, persist them to Redis and see what we get. So moving from the person.py file here over to app.py, which is where our Flask application lives. Let's take a look at how this works just really quickly. So this is a pretty basic Flask application. We just declare Flask and import everything that it needs. And then we have some routes in our application that are going to respond or going to correspond to different things that we want to do with a person object. So we have a post route here that's going to create a new one. And that's where we want to look at how we actually use Redis OM to persist something into Redis. So it's extremely simple. What we're going to do here is we're going to call this route and we're going to pass it in a JSON object that has the same schema as our person. So it has all of those right fields and the embedded address object and the list of skills. And what we basically then do is just get the request JSON from Flask or the dictionary of the right sort of values if you were building this up yourself in Python. And we create a new instance of that person with it. So new person becomes person with those values. And then Redis OM gives us a very simple just .save. So all we do is save the person into the database and they will be persisted there. How do we know how to get them back again? Well, when we've created a person, even before we save it, Redis OM creates a primary key for them, and we can call newperson.pk to get that. These are created in the client so that you don't have to go to the database and say, can I have a primary key, please? And they use industry standard ULID keys, so they're guaranteed to be unique across different processes that are calling this or performing this action. So if 2 or 3 instances of this application save a person into the data store, you're not going to get a clash. If our person didn't pass muster, the Redis OM validation for the dictionary or the JSON that we passed in didn't pass, we'll get a validation error, and then we can just return our bad request. So let's see how this works in practice. I think I've left the application up and running in the background here. Yep, we have. So what I'm going to do is do a curl request and create a new person. So the data for that is actually in the README here. So the README for this application is very comprehensive. If you're following along, I highly recommend using it. And here we go. Let's add a new person. So we want to add a new person, and we want this curl command. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to put it into the terminal here, and let's see what happens. So okay, seems to be successful because what we got back was a ULID here. So we got back the ID of this new person, Joanne Peel. And I'm going to copy that and keep it in my cheat sheet of people's IDs that we've got going on here. So let me just do that. Oops, Joanne Peel is that one. Okay, so that's created something in Redis now. So let's see if we can see if it really did. Here I've got Redis Insight, which is a graphical tool for managing Redis, and I can hit refresh on here, and you can see we have all of these people that were created. So if we have a click around here, here's one that was made before, another one that was loaded in, another one. Here's our JSON peel that we just created. So what Redis Insight is showing us here is that the type of this key in Redis Stack is JSON. So it's a native JSON document inside the Redis instance. Its full key name is this. So Redis OM's given it a sort of namespace, and you can override this and change that prefix if you want. By default, it just takes it from the module that it's running in Python. And we can see that JSON peel has got some skills and an address and so forth. We could actually change this data in here, so I can edit it. Let's not do that though. And down here in Redis Insight, I've got a Redis CLI, so I can copy this key and I can run Redis commands against it. So one of those is json.get. So I can do json.get and then the key I want to get something from, and then I can get all of the document, or I can get parts of it, which is some of the power of Redis Stack's JSON capabilities. So say I wanted the address, I can do $.address, and then I can do $.skills, and say just get me the first skill. And then what comes back is the first skill for JSON peel, which is synths, and just the address and nothing else. So if these documents were really, really big, you can use this query language, which is JSON path, to get parts of the document out. So you've got a very powerful underlying set of commands here, as well as the high-level Redis OM. Okay, so we've seen how to put data into Redis Stack. How do we get it out again? The most simple case is, let's assume we know that user's ULID, their ID, and we just want to pull their record back in its entirety. So swap into VS Code here again, I can open up app.py, our Flask application, and we have a route in here, /person/by-ID, and then you provide an ID. So that ID will be the ULID of the person's document that we want to get. And then how do we do that? Very easy with Redis OM. The person class that we created, Redis OM has added a get method to that. It's part of the Redis OM class that we extended when we made our person, and we just pass it in a ULID ID. And if there's a corresponding document in the database for that, it will build a person object for it. And if there isn't, it will throw a not found error. And then for Flask, all we do is turn that into a Python dict so that we can send it back out through Flask as a JSON document. And let's see if we can try that out in the terminal. So I have cheated and I've got a curl command ready here. So we're basically saying curl the Flask application person by ID and then that ULID. And what you'll see is we get that person's entire JSON representation back out of Redis Stack. So finding someone by ID is a pretty basic and common operation, but it's nothing special. It's kind of what you'd expect from a key value store. You know, everything's stored against a key and we get things back by a key. But what if we want to do other things? So in a realistic application, we're not always going to get people back by ID because we're not going to know the ID. We're going to want to find people by other things or combinations of things. So swapping back to the code here, what we can see is how we're going to use the search capability of Redis Stack to enable that. So here we're going to try and find people that have a specific first and last name. So if we don't know their ID, but we do know their name, we can look them up that way. And here we have a Flask route. It's going to take first name and last name as parameters. And here we have a find predicate or a find function that is part of the person class that Redis OM created for us. And we can pass it a series of find clauses and it will basically go away and use Redis search underneath the hood to find documents that match and return them to us as person objects that we can then do whatever we like with. So here we're saying we want to find all the people where the person's first name is whatever the first name is, and the person's last name field is whatever the last name field is. And then we want to say .all, we want all of those back. And what we're going to do with those is then run them through a utility function. All that basically does is it takes that set of objects that comes back from Redis OM and turns it into a dict and a JSON document to send back through Flask to the calling process. So if we see what happens when we call this, we should get everybody that matches a first name and a last name. So again, remember, Redis is fundamentally a key value store. So we shouldn't really be able to do this normally because we haven't stored people by first name and last name. We've stored them by ULID. So we're using the power of the Redis search capability of Redis Stack to do this. So if I switch to terminal here and clear the previous query, I've again cheated and cut and pasted a curl request for this into my terminal. These are all inside the README for this workshop, so you can try these at home yourselves. Basically, we're going to say, find me all the people who have the name Kareem Khan. And here we get a results array back. Our utility function just puts all of the people objects into dicts and then puts them in an array and stores them against a key called results. So there's only one here. We got all of Kareem's record as we would expect. So with a very minimal amount of code that is basically pretty declarative and easy to understand, we've been able to perform a query, and we've not had to build secondary indices or maintain them ourselves in Redis Stack. Redis OM and Redis Stack search capability are doing all of that for us. So from this start point, we can now explore some other queries that Redis OM and Redis Stack search can do for us. So finding somebody by first and last name is great. That finds mostly one person because we're unlikely to have too many users with the same first and last name. But what if we wanted to find people that fell into some sort of range? So one of our fields inside the person was age. And a natural thing to want to do might be to find people in a given age range. So people between a specified minimum and maximum age. And again, this would normally be difficult to do in a key value store, but with the search capabilities of Redis Stack and Redis OM's querying capabilities, makes it very easy. So here again, I'm using person.find. I want to find some things. I want to find all of the matches. And I want to find matches where the age field is greater than or equal to some supplied minimum number. And the age field is also less than or equal to some supplied max number. And then for extra bonus points, I want to return those sorted by the age field. So this is something that Redis OM can do for us, and it will actually have Redis do that for us. So it's done on the database server for speed and efficiency, so we're not sorting it in Python. And then again, I just build my results object and send it back out through the Flask endpoint. So when we go ahead and call this, I should expect to see people whose ages fall within a given range. So let's try it out. Clear that. And yet again, I have kind of cheated and I've got the curl from the README in my clipboard. So we're going to find people between age 30 and 47. So when we do that, we get back users here that match those criteria. So we've got all of their JSON documents back out of Redis Stack. Okay, so then we saw how to do a range query. Let's see what else we can do. We can start to get quite fancy with some of this stuff. So let's have a look here. What if we wanted to find all of the people who had a specific skill and lived in a specific city? So I don't know, this might be a dating app for musicians or something. We might want to find all of the guitarists that live in Birmingham, England or something like that. Again, person.find, the Redis OM find function is going to be what we're going to go for here. And again, it's going to be fairly simple. So let's take the easy case first. We want to find the person.address.city. So we're going deeper into that JSON structure there. We want that to match the provided city parameter. And then we also want person.skills, which if you remember was an array of strings. We want that to contain the desired skill. So in Redis OM's sort of query language, this double right shift operator here is basically a is in. So we want desired skill to be in person.skills and person.address to be person.address.city to be the city that we are looking for. And again, we want to find all of those, and we do the usual thing with returning them through Flask. So you can see here, we're starting to get queries. We can build up some very complicated queries here and query the data in a lot of ways that makes it very, very flexible to have it stored in JSON here in an in-memory data store that's very fast, and with a query language like this that's kind of intuitive to use. So let's go to the terminal again and clear this out. And once again, I've got this pasted in here. So we're going to try and find all of the people who have the guitar skills, so all of the guitarists in the city of Sheffield in South Yorkshire in England. And here we have them. So all of these people have Sheffield as their city, and they also have guitar as one of their skills somewhere in that array. So using this, we've got a sort of basic find me a bandmate type functionality perhaps, or if this was a dating app, find somebody with similar interests in my city. Okay, so that's kind of exact matches and range matches and contains matches covered. When we built the person model, we had this field personal statement, and the personal statement was a sort of long flowing bit of free text. And we said we wanted to do full text indexing on that. So let's have a look at how we can use the search capabilities full text indexing to bring back things that don't completely match a given term. So again, back to app.py, we have a route here, find people by statement and then a given search term. And again, we're using the sort of ubiquitous person.find here. And this time we're saying we want the personal statement, which is a field that we indexed as full text search. So this is only going to work on fields that we've specified we want that on. And the reason why we do that on some fields and not all would be, for example, to keep the size of the index down if you want to keep that under control. And also because you do want exact matches on other things. So some things you want to treat like tags, other things you want to treat like a document within the document. So in the case of personal statement here, we want to do a full text search for the search term. And we're going to do a really basic one and just say, does the document contain something that essentially stems from whatever the search term is? And we want to find all of those things as we have done before. And then, as you've seen before, we just return the data through Flask. So let's see how this works. I can clear the previous query and let's do this. And we are going to look for all of the people who have something that stems from play in their personal statement. So when we return this, what we'll see is we've got someone here where it matched on plays, and we've got someone here where it matched on play, and we've got someone here where it matched on playing. So all of those things match the sort of search term play. So if you're building something that needs a sort of fuzzier search, then this is really powerful and very, very easy to access. And the underlying search capability has a whole query language for all sorts of different full text search use cases. So what we've seen now is that we can do very simple data retrieval. We can do more complicated searches. We can do ranges. We can look for things that are in a set of tags, if you like, and now we can do a full text sort of fuzzier search over a longer piece of text within the document. So the obvious thing to do next is then look at, well, what if we need to update one of these documents, and what happens when we're done with them? So far, we've only done read type operations on our people. So we created one, and then we've done lots and lots of queries to see what matches a given set of search terms. Now, another thing we might commonly want to do is update data in Redis using Redis OM. So how do we do that? So if I go over here and scroll up a little bit, we've got a method that will do that. So here we go, update a person's age. So we want to take a person by their ID, so their ULID, and give them a new age. So say they had a birthday, or they got their age wrong in the first place, or anything. This is just a Flask thing to say we want the new age to be an integer because people generally have integer ages. They don't have fractional ones. And this is extremely simple in Redis OM. So first off, we're going to use the ID provided to get that person's record or document out of Redis Stack. And if we didn't find it, we're just going to return a bad request. Then we're going to just set the age field to be the new age provided as a parameter and just call save again. And that will basically change that person's age over inside Redis to the new value. So let's try that out and again, clear the previous result. I've again got the curl. You can find this in the README. So we're going to change Joanne Peel, that user that we created when we first started looking at this. She was 36 and we're going to make her 37. So we get a response, okay. Did that really happen? Here's Joanne. Let's just click away and come back. And yeah, she's 37 now. So that updated in Redis Insight, no problem. So continuing with our wanting to modify data, what if we want to delete somebody? Again, we have a route here that takes an ID, and all we're going to do is on our person class that Redis OM has decorated with all of these other functions, methods for us, we're just going to call delete on that ID. And we're either going to get 0 or 1 back, and we don't really care from this perspective whether or not that succeeded, because if we delete somebody that doesn't exist, then it really doesn't matter. So what I'm going to do is not actually run that, because we're going to do something else with Joanne Peel instead, and we're going to try and set an expiry time on her. So rather than deleting her record immediately, we're going to say to Redis Stack, delete it at some time in the future, consider it expired. And for that, we're going to have to look at another feature of Redis OM for Python. Okay, so sometimes we want to expire our users in the future rather than delete them immediately. Imagine we have a model whereby you pay monthly, and if you don't pay, then your user is expired after a certain amount of time. So we just, every time you pay, we set a time to live on your record for like 5 weeks into the future or whatever it's going to be. And we'll let Redis Stack manage that for us. So let's see how we do that with Redis OM for Python here. So I'm just going to search for the expire method. Here we are. And we have a route here that takes a couple of parameters. Again, it takes an ID, a ULID, and it takes an integer number of seconds that we want to expire that person's record after. Redis also supports expiring at a specific time. So rather than so many seconds in the future, we could use a different command called expire at and provide a Unix timestamp. So the moment in time at which we want that record to be considered expired if we have an absolute time. So what's interesting here is to do this, we're going to use like a lower level interface to Redis that's built into Redis OM for Python. So if you want to do something that is not in the sort of high level data modeling part of Redis OM, you can basically call person.db, and that gives you an underlying connection to Redis. And then every Redis command, so we're going to use the Redis expire command here, is then a function on that DB. So we're just going to say person.db.expire. And then what we need as well is from the person's ID, we need their complete key in Redis. So Redis OM has been managing those for us, and we've not explicitly dealt with them so far. But in this case, because I'm using a lower level command that expects a complete key name as its first parameter, I have to get the key. So I go load that person from Redis. And then when that object has been fully populated for us by Redis OM, it has a key function or method. I can call that. That'll give me the full key. And then I just tell the underlying Redis connection how many seconds I want to expire that in. And again, if that person doesn't exist, we don't actually care because they're then expired in the same way. They're out of the system. It doesn't matter if we found them or not. So we're always going to return OK in this case. So what we can see when we call this is this gives us the ability to sort of go deep with Redis and use that lower level interface, so anything we want to do, and mix it with the higher level data modeling that we've seen so far in this workshop. So what I'm going to do is flip back to the terminal here and clear this. And again, I've got the command or the curl set up for this already. I'm going to give it 40 seconds and we'll see what happens when we do that. So I've done OK, or I've got an OK response. Let's swap to Redis Insight and have a look at Joanne now. And you'll see this TTL value is set. So it says 32. If I refresh it, it's counting down 25, 24. What's going to happen in that many seconds is that Redis is going to consider this record expired and it will be removed from Redis. So off we go, 12 seconds. We just keep talking. It's eventually going to disappear. And what we will see when this timer runs out is that basically we get an error here because this key doesn't exist anymore. So there we go. Redis Insight can't find this one anymore. It's not there. And if I refresh my list over here, it's gone now. This doesn't exist anymore. So this is a useful behavior in this application if we want to manage something like you get deleted if you don't pay your subscription. But also what I wanted to show here was that you've still got access to the full power of everything you can do with Redis inside the Redis OM client. So it's kind of the only client that you need to use for Redis if you want to mix this high-level data modeling and retrieval interface and query language with the lower-level command-based Redis that you might already be used to. Okay, so that's basically the end of this workshop. Hopefully you found it informative and learned about how to use Redis OM with Redis Stack. We looked at how to store JSON documents and retrieve them in various different ways, as well as how to use Redis OM as your only Redis client by accessing the underlying command-based interface. If you'd like some help and support with projects that involve Redis OM and Redis Stack, then we have some resources for you. First up, you should join our Discord at discord.gg/Redis. It's a friendly place to come discuss all things Redis, programming languages too. And if you're on one of our Redis University courses, then we have channels for each of those, as well as a channel for the Redis OM clients and various different programming languages and capabilities of Redis Stack. The Redis OM GitHub itself, Redis OM for Python, is a great place to go look at what's happening with the client and file an issue if you have a bug or if you find something wrong with the documentation or you just see a feature that is missing that you think you would like to have in there. The maintainers of Redis OM watch this and will reply to you in a timely fashion. Then finally, over on the right, we have the developer.redis.com site, which is a great resource for lots of articles and tutorials with how to use Redis, Redis OM, and all the capabilities of Redis Stack in different environments. It'll show you how to set it up locally in the cloud, how to build applications that deploy to common platforms such as Google Cloud or Vercel or DigitalOcean and so forth. And there's new materials appearing there on a daily basis. Finally, you can also contact me directly. I'm at Simon_Prickett on Twitter, and I try and respond there. But the easiest way to get help and support with this would be go to Discord, as that's monitored by a team and also the wider community. So you may find that other users may be able to help you. Hopefully you enjoyed today's workshop, and thank you very much for your time.